Your front door's wide open, your valuables laid out for all to see. Welcome, thieves. This is your day. And imagine if it's not watches, cash or gold, but your nation's security that's there to be taken. You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. Today, we are talking cyber attacks listed by the World Economic Forum as one of the 5 most likely global risks alongside extreme weather, natural disasters, and the failure to tackle climate change. Health service, the military, the power grid, all at risk. How do you stop the thieves?
Large-scale cyber attacks are on the rise. In the last few years, big organizations such as Yahoo, Sony, and TalkTalk have all been targeted by hackers. But as an increasing number fall victim to cybercrime and attacks become more complex and coordinated, is it time to review our current methods of cybersecurity? The hacking of Yahoo in 2013 is the biggest data breach in history. 3 billion accounts were affected. Online thieves gained access to names, birth dates, and email addresses, as well as other encrypted information. Although it's the biggest, it's not the only case of cybercrime affecting vast numbers of people. Britain's National Health Service, eBay, Apple, and many more have all fallen victim to hacking. It's big business, and it's estimated cybercrime will cost approximately $6 trillion by the year 2021.
The scope and pace of cyber attacks against our federal networks and the control systems that run our critical infrastructure are continually increasing, with attacks growing ever more complex.
The methods hackers use can be elaborate and varied. Malicious software or malware can be unwittingly downloaded onto computers when hackers use tricks to lure people in. One way of doing this is phishing, which makes it look like electronic communications or emails are from a legitimate source. By opening these messages or responding to them, people give away sensitive information.
Thank you!
Political parties have been hit by apparent state-sponsored phishing. Emails among Democrats in the US were allegedly hacked by Russia and distributed via WikiLeaks, damaging Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign for president. Another hacking method is a man-in-the-middle attack. It's like eavesdropping, where a hacker secretly intercepts communications between 2 people, changing the content of messages or capturing the data you sent to a website. The UN considers cybercrime a serious threat to global security. It leaves millions of people vulnerable to identity theft and blackmail and can lead to political instability. With so many high-profile hacks, is the internet as secure as it needs to be? Or are authorities facing an impossible task to stop hacks when technology changes so rapidly?
To start our conversation about this, we go to Illinois. Joining us via Skype, we have Paul Fraser, cybersecurity program leader at Webster University there, former US Air Force officer. Joseph Carson joins us from Estonia. He's the chief security scientist, I beg your pardon, for Thycotic, a cybersecurity company. And earlier this year saw the publication of his book, Cybersecurity for Dummies. In the studio, we have Tony Morbin, editor-in-chief of SC, that's a cybersecurity magazine, and Amanda Finch is the general manager at the Institute of Information Security Professionals. I could not have been joined by a more august and cooperative body who you all know that this is vital that we talk about it. Let's split it into 2 if we can. First of all, the international calamity side of things, and then we'll bring it back to the personal side of things, which would be a calamity for anybody who loses something. So, Paul, can I talk to you first as a former military man? How you've been looking at this, or you did in the military for 25 years. When you first started, you must have thought it was just quite interesting and perhaps a nuisance, but now it has become a major international threat. How come?
It became that way because there became money in cybersecurity and theft and hacking. In the early days, the hacking was more based upon just somebody going in there and defacing a website, having a little fun, showing a, making something embarrassing on a website. Then they learned that you can get a hold of accounts, you can get a hold of credit cards, you can do all kinds of things. And that's why it has grown so big, is because there's a lot of money in it.
Okay, we'll talk about the military side of things in just a moment, but how big a business is it? Tony, your thoughts on that first.
Well, you did see the 6 trillion figure, and
That's
I've seen,
a projection, isn't it?
well, that's a projection, but even today they're talking about a million pounds a second is being stolen globally. So it really is huge, and in fact, cybercrime has overtaken physical crime in the UK. You're more likely to be a victim of hacking than you are to be mugged in the street.
Let me talk to you, Joe, at cybersecurity for dummies. Do you have to be a genius to get involved in these criminal activities, or is it quite simple?
It is actually quite simple. Anyone who basically has a computer connected to the internet can actually become a cyber criminal.
Goodness gracious. And I mean, in your book, Cybersecurity for Dummies, can you help me or can you help governments protect themselves and their people against this sort of thing?
Absolutely. One of the things we're really forgetting is down to the basics. There's a lot of things that we can do that are very simple that can actually reduce our impact or possibility of becoming a victim of cybercrime. One of the biggest areas is around even password hygiene, password reuse, poor password choices.
Amanda, you were, I think, making noises in agreement with
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
But
yeah.
What do you want to say about what you first
No,
said?
I think that that's absolutely right, that there's an awful lot that people can do to protect themselves. The cyber hygiene thing is absolutely huge. And if you look at some of the big breaches, that they could have been avoided.
Are governments, though, doing enough? Because we'll get on to the personal side of this thing, if we may, towards the end of the programme. But the UK government, for example, has a new Minister for Cybersecurity, Ben Wallace, and I've just got a list of the things that he's responsible for: implementing strategic defence, communications, data legislation, aviation security, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear defence.
Yeah.
I mean, his portfolio, and down the bottom it says cybersecurity.
Yes.
Who's taking this seriously?
Well, government are trying to take it seriously, that there are various areas within the UK government where they're focusing on cyber. You've got the Home Office, you've also got DCMS, you've got NCSC. So they are
Which is
taking...
the National Cyber Security Centre.
That's correct.
But they're
and
only
that's the
getting,
Cheltenham.
what, 6 billion? I know it
Yeah,
sounds a lot over
it's not enough.
5 years. It's not enough.
It's
is
not enough. And it needs to be focused. But I think it's not just a government problem, is that it is such a big problem that everybody's got to work together. It's organisations, it's government, it's individuals, it's education. Everybody's got to attack this problem.
All right, we'll get into the fact that there's a lack of communication. Sorry, was that to you, Joe? Did you
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, please jump in at any time.
Sure. One of the things I think is really important is, and I completely agree with Amanda, is that cybersecurity is not just a technology issue, it's actually a people issue as well.
Yeah.
And we have to get the fundamentally balancing that. When I hear about 6 billion being invested in cybersecurity, one of my concerns is we're not equally investing in people. People is one of the fundamental. If you have people who know what they're doing and educated and trained to use the technology, then we'll have better results.
I want to talk about the level of investment in people. Again, sorry to keep postponing things, but a little bit later in the programme. But Paul, I want to come to you and read about and talk about the edge of Armageddon here, because if somebody hijacks a nuclear power plant, as we saw in Iran, and suspected to be the Israelis, if somebody gets into a medical system, as happened here in the United Kingdom with the NHS, if somebody takes over a drone, God forbid, I mean, that could start a war. It is that difficult, isn't it?
That's, you're 100% correct. If somebody captures a drone that's in flight, particularly if that drone has a weapon on it, they could drop it someplace else. They could start a war. As much, just watch any particular James Bond movie, and that stuff can come real.
So who's in front on this? Is it the cyber criminals, or is it the people trying to pursue them and stop them?
It's always
Well,
criminals. Sorry.
Yeah.
criminals-
First you, Paul, then Tony. Yeah.
I think the criminals have the upper hand, because as cyber defenders, we have to try to defend against absolutely everything. And all the cyber criminal needs is one weak link, and that can either be a technology patch that hasn't been made, or a user that leaves his password out in the open, something like that.
Yeah, it's like the IRA said to Margaret Thatcher after they tried to assassinate her in Brighton all those years ago. You know, you may have been lucky today. You've got to be lucky every day.
Yes.
We only have to be lucky once.
That's it. And the thing about the defenders is that the normal mode is for them to be reactive. So the cyber criminals will come up with something new. We'll find a way to defend against it. Then they'll come up with something new. We'll find a way to defend against it. So that gap between them finding something new and us finding a way to defend against it is when we're vulnerable.
Isn't that the wrong way round, though? I mean, should we not be one step ahead of them because we've got the money, we've got the resources, we've got the expertise, we can call on anybody. So why is it the wrong way around?
We do try to be proactive, but whilst we do come up with defences that they haven't thought about, they will then also come up with attacks that we haven't thought about. And also everything that we use, it was very interesting the other day, IBM actually used artificial intelligence to deliberately make an attack. So we're using artificial intelligence to defend ourselves, but to try and understand what they might do, IBM then created an attack method using artificial intelligence, which on the other hand is also sort of showing the criminals what you can do, not that they didn't already know.
Yeah, I mean, aren't we, we're too far behind, aren't we, Amanda? And if that is the case, how do we catch up or overtake, indeed?
Well, I think it's always been like this, that we've always played catch up, because what happens is that you get new technologies, you get new platforms, you get, I mean, IoT is the big thing at the moment.
Help me with that.
Internet of Things. So it's your toaster being able to talk to your fridge and all of those things. There's intelligence in end products, basically. So when you get a new technology, the technology people want to get the functionality out there and they want to get to market quickly, and they don't always think about the security side of things. And so the security gets put in as a bolt-on afterwards, which leads to the vulnerabilities.
Argument, which is, there are so many people, not just the criminals out there trying to get rich quick, but there are people out there advancing technology so rapidly to get rich that they're leaving us vulnerable.
Yes, and I think the other problem that we've got is that everything is connected now. Whereas beforehand, when I started doing it many years ago, a lot of things were standalone. They were behind firewalls. They didn't connect to that many things. Now everything's connected. And that means that the pace and the speed of developing attacks is much, much quicker. You've got platforms that are not necessarily that well protected. So there is a massive job to do, but we do need to do it, and we need to focus on the things that are important.
Who wants to come up with a solution?
I don't know about the solution, but I would sort of certainly. Oh, sorry, Joe. Oh, okay. I was just going to say that the whole idea of everything being connected, you know, whether we're connecting our kettles and fridges to the internet. Okay, maybe you can get your hot water at home before you arrive home, but the fact is, anything connected to the internet is hackable, and so you know, people call it a smart device. It's actually a hackable device.
I ask for solutions, not problems. We'll come to you,
well,
Joe,
the solution to that is don't buy stuff that connects to the internet just because it connects to the internet, and think about, as Amanda was saying, think about security before you connect something to a device if you're a manufacturer.
If we're talking about national security, is there any way that governments on a larger scale, anybody with this one, could do the same thing, not use the internet as we know it, but use other things?
Yeah, so I just want to comment in this. I'm not quite agreeing with that. We shouldn't embrace the internet. We should embrace the internet with responsibility and understand the awareness. If we look back at 2007 in Estonia, when we were having basically a state war based on cyber that was impacting government systems and the way of life, Estonia didn't decide to stop and go back to the old ways. They decided to embrace and move forward ways to solve it. So ultimately, we do the same. And one of the things that we need to do from not just a technology perspective, the people perspective, it also needs to be done from government as well. We need to find a way to ensure there is no safe havens for cyber criminals to hide.
So there needs to be what, some kind of international consensus on how to deal with what is effectively an international problem.
Correct.
And Paul, can you come up with an idea here that we could perhaps take forward?
Well, one of the problems is also the fact that not only are we connected, but we have different, countries have different customs and things like that. So you got to overcome customs. You got to, in America, we have an opt-out where a company can use our information unless we opt out of it. Whereas in Europe, a company cannot use your personal information unless you opt in. So there's varying differences of thoughts and applications. So it would be real nice if we could come up with a standard way, but that would be extremely difficult.
Well, let me mention a book that's just been written. It's called Click Here to Kill. It's by Bruce Schneier. I think I've maybe got his name right when I said that. And he says he believes that cybersecurity should not be left to the market. Elsewhere, governments regulate things that kill and should do in this instance.
I think there's a great example of the General Data Protection Act, which is new EU regulations about what companies can do with your data. Prior to that coming in for anybody who holds data on EU citizens, companies did not actually report a breach. They would hide the fact. And now they legally have to. So now the US, which has different regulation, is looking at introducing something similar, and it is driving things. So regulation is certainly necessary. HMRC introduced a system where...
That's our inland revenue.
Sorry, our tax
in the UK,
system, yeah. So the tax department here introduced a system where you can't just have scammers sending out emails as if they come from the tax office, which you did have before. So government can take action. The NCSC was involved in sort of stopping the, well, in fact, actually, it wasn't them that stopped the WannaCry attack, but certainly that was one of the first areas where they were helping coordinate responses. Prior to the NCSC, there was no person that you would turn to if you were under attack.
Okay, so we're catching up a little bit, but in a sense it's still amateur hour, isn't it? I mean, you remember watching Mark Zuckerberg in front of Congress, and they knew absolutely nothing of what he was talking about. Now somebody is suggesting that there should be a core of public interest technologists to guide them. In other words, they should be led by the hand by people who know more about this when they're making decisions of national and international importance. That's not enough, is it?
Well, I think the other problem you've got is that hackers and cybercrime knows no international boundaries. So you've got countries like America, Britain, the EU, that are trying to put in good things and good controls. But you've got a whole load of other countries out there that are not going to embrace those because they see that as a business that they're probably quite happy to support. So it's difficult.
Are you talking about Russia here or other countries?
Well, there are other countries.
Russia's been implicated in an awful lot of hacking. And
state-sponsored activism and things like that. But there are other countries that are in the same boat.
And there's crossovers between the criminals and the government in places like Russia, where the government will go and use sort of hackers to do its work, and some of them may go off-piste in the evenings. And then you get places like North Korea, which is actually believed to be directly behind crime.
Why don't you pay the hackers more than they're getting through these criminal enterprises, bring them into government, corral them and make them work for the greater good? Is that something that can happen?
So one of the things is that we have to remember that there's actually more hackers out there that are actually doing things for good. Majority of hackers are actually ethical. They want to help people. They want to bring awareness. They want to help find vulnerabilities before they're abused by criminals. So going back to one of the things that you mentioned, yes, there is a growing area of cyber mercenaries. But those cyber mercenaries are in countries where actually these are not crimes. So this is where we get into some cooperation to make sure that those mercenaries and cyber criminals are not given actually the ability to get away with it.
We're in a right muddle, in other words, because while some people are doing it for good, then there is no international consensus on this. What about my suggestion, just out of the blue, that you do, in a sense, what they tried in Afghanistan, to pay them more to fight for the army than to fight for the Taliban, but the Taliban then upped the wages and they all went to fight for the Taliban. If you, Paul, paid the hackers more than they were getting elsewhere, then they would work for the greater good, all of them, possibly.
Possibly, but at the same time, can you really trust them at that point in time? Because they're gonna play for whoever pays the most at the time.
Okay. These are big business enterprises.
They're going to take the money from both sides as well. They'll take the money, and while their brother goes and does the robbery.
No solutions yet. No solutions.
We'll find some.
Come on, come up with something.
I think one of the things we talked about earlier is that you need to get everybody involved in trying to make the solution. One thing that we're drastically short of is trained people to actually counter this. And there's a massive skill shortage at the moment. When we talk about the skill shortage, what we're talking about really is a shortage of people that are trained. We've got the skills out there because we need people that have got technical skills, we need people that have got analytical skills. It's really mobilizing more people to be able to look at the problem and start dealing with it.
So how would you go about that? How would you make sure that you had enough people trained well enough to be able to contribute something?
You'd have to do it on a number of levels. In the UK, we've got a problem with STEM subjects, which are the technical subjects. They're not that greatly taken up in schools. We need to encourage more kids to go into the technical subjects. We need to encourage them to learn on the job. So apprenticeship schemes are great because we can get people in and mobilised pretty quickly to start working in the environment and dealing.
And that would then lead to them being
They can then be
experts.
led by practitioners that can help them. We need to attract people from other areas as well. I mean, if you look at the things like psychological profiling, I mean, there's a huge place for people that have got psychology backgrounds within our profession.
And you don't need to be a genius.
You don't need to be a
able to
genius.
work
Look at
in this
me.
area.
I'm not a genius, but I'm an ordinary girl that just
And only
ended up into
11% of the workforce
are women.
is women.
And
at the
that's,
moment.
you're
another
cutting out
area.
50% of the workforce.
Not only do we need to generally educate the masses, but we need to start early because we have very young teenagers and sometimes preteens that have cell phones and smartphones and they're connected to the internet. We have to educate them now and get them going now, which falls in line with that STEM projects. We run some STEM projects here at Webster University, and St. Louis has a community, has a consortium of people to just train people and get them into the workforce.
Well, an awful lot of this has been about personal security as well. But as we come towards the end of the program, we are aware that there are international sides to this as well. But if you could each perhaps give one example of where you think I or somebody else could actually improve their cybersecurity at home. I mean, because there's a government warning this week about your router.
Yeah.
UK government warning. So first things first, passwords, I think password is still the most widely used password, isn't it?
Correct.
Yes, it is.
So use your noggin, use your brain a bit more when it comes to that.
And the second most popular one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So if I did it with a 9 on the end, I'd be unusual.
Yes.
I won't stop.
Tony.
Well, I mean, the passwords is a classic one because on the one hand, we're being told, you've got to change your password for every site you go on because if it gets hacked, you'll get your other one hacked. Use something complicated, totally random letters, numbers, and symbols.
But then you've got to write it down, and everybody says don't write it down.
Well, that's exactly the thing. If you've got 50 sites that you go on and you're trying to remember these 50 different things, and there are methods such as password managers. But I mean, if you've got Mark Zuckerberg getting hacked, I mean, how techie do we have to be? So maybe the onus really should be on the companies to introduce things like two-factor authentication so it's a bit more secure and actually encrypt the data that they're holding about us so that if it does get stolen, it can't be used.
That is a very good point. Encrypt the data. Also, don't connect your kettle to your fridge.
And
So,
back-
Let's go to your router as well, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have an awful lot of time, Amanda. Yeah?
And the other thing is to apply the auto updates because the security patches come out from the manufacturers. So Microsoft do a patching cycle every month. So just have your auto update on and that will get rid
Easy
of a
to
lot.
forget that, isn't it?
Well, no, you just switch it on once and then that's it.
Okay.
And it'll auto update.
And there's no way that malware can come in.
Malware can still come in, but if you're getting rid of the majority of them, so if you come back to the WannaCry incident that we had earlier in the year, that was a patch that was available about 4 months beforehand, and it hadn't been applied to those surfaces.
Joe, you wanted to say something. We are getting close to the end.
Sure, absolutely. I agree with all the points, multi-factor authentication, password hygiene, using password managers, better awareness. One of the things from a home perspective is one of the best things you can do is when you're not using it, turn it off.
Yes.
Actually, that's simply, if it's not on, it's actually less compromisable. So get into the habit. We have this really bad thing of standby mode or power saving mode, which doesn't really turn anything off. Get into the habit of actually putting card switches, turn it off when you're not really using it.
That's a very good piece of advice, isn't it? Tony, last word.
Also on a government, there's things like the Tallinn Manual, which is basically trying to find a Geneva Convention for working on cyber. So cyber warfare, the countries need to work together.
And do you think that's likely?
I think on a superficial level, yes, but I think they will break the rules. But at the moment, there aren't even rules to break.
Okay. Amanda, hopeful for the future? Do you think we could crack this?
I think if we really step up to the plate and everybody plays their part in it, that we can, but we've got to be concerted.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you very much for watching. Yes, okay, there is some optimism as we go forward on this matter, but I think it's absolutely vital from what you've heard today, from what we read, and from what we do every single day of our lives, most of us. Take care and hope that your governments are doing the same when it comes to keeping you safe. Thanks for watching. I'm David Foster. Thank you for my guests for being here, and we'll see you next time, I hope. Bye-bye.